We often talk about threats to free speech, no more so than in our education system, but also across the public sector, our civil institutions, and increasingly in the private sector, where we've seen a boom in so-called corporate wokery. Now that UK universities are mostly back to business as usual, stories of no platforming, cancelling, and woke indoctrination are back in the papers. Wolfson College, Cambridge, for example, recently imposed a mandatory anti-racism workshop on freshers. This covered highly contestable concepts such as microaggressions, whiteness, and privilege. This is not the only story from the elite institution. Last week, the president of the Cambridge Union, which according to its website has historically defended free speech, banned historian Andrew Graham Dixon from speaking ever again at the Debating Society after he impersonated Hitler. The incident took place in a debate about bad taste. The historian said this was intended to underline the utterly evil nature of the Nazis. The union leader has now backtracked on his plans to draw up a blacklist of speakers. In campuses up and down the country, speakers are regularly no-platformed. Cancel culture is seen as a political tool to silence opinions deemed to be beyond the pale, and universities are requiring students to complete diversity courses, including on white privilege and the use of pronouns. Countercultural academics, like Sussex professor Kathleen Stock, have found themselves hounded out of their positions for holding problematic views on sex and gender, while polling shows that a large portion of students and academics are self-censoring their opinions because they fear their views will clash with the woke values promoted in their university. But how concerned should we be by this trend? Were universities ever true bastions of free speech? Are anti-racism courses of this type really an imposition, or are they a harmless attempt to be inclusive? And why are corporations so on board with this agenda? Finally, what should the classical liberal response to cancel culture be, if there is indeed one? Thank you for joining us on the IEA YouTube channel. I'm Emily Carver, Head of Media at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Marc Glendening, Head of Cultural Affairs, and Kristian Niemietz, who is Head of Political Economy. Please do give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. You can also sign up to be an IEA patron for a small monthly fee, which gives you various perks, including priority access to content and live events. Hello, thanks for joining me.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So Marc, starting with the universities, you've argued that many students no longer value free speech, at least not without various exemptions. However, do these unions, for example, the Cambridge Union, which banned this historian, do they not have the right to decide who speaks at their venue? And if they find something is inappropriate or offensive, can they not take action?
That terrible word, inappropriate, sends a chill
problematic
down my spine. So, as no doubt we'll come to explore when discussing Kristian's excellent recent blog for 1828. There is obviously a dimension here of private property rights, but that doesn't mean that those of us who are political liberals, who value pluralism, shouldn't have the right or should refrain from criticising institutions, particularly institutions which present themselves to the world as debating clubs, when they draw up incredibly lists of people, like something out of Senator McCarthy at, the height of the whole kind of Cold War hysteria in the 1950s. They draw up lists of people who are going to be banned for life, including the excellent Andrew Graham Dixon, who did a humorous and mocking impersonation of Adolf Hitler. Well, Britain has a long tradition of mocking dictators, and it has been our cynical sense of humour which I think has protected this country from totalitarian politics of various kinds. And, for example, you can think of the film The Great Dictators of Charlie Chaplin. Would that be banned today? That is clearly a film. He's taking the piss out of Mussolini and Hitler. George Orwell wrote about the way in which the British could never take fascism and Sir Oswald Mosley seriously, because the whole camp aroma of fascist politics, of people stomping around in homoerotic uniforms. It was clearly not something that would ever catch on in this country. We don't have a sense of deference, and that, I think, is a wonderful thing. We mock authority, and this is, I think, something that makes Britain very different from other European countries. And I speak as somebody who's half French and appreciates in France they don't have this attitude to authority, sadly. One case I just want to quickly flag up, which I think is really relevant to this, is that the Tate is now thinking of putting up trigger warnings next to the prints of William Hogarth. Hogarth represents the non-deferential and humorous instincts of the British mob. His prints and cartoons mocked royalty, they mocked politicians of the time. They epitomised Georgian liberal values. And now he's being accused of being a sexist or something, I don't know. Or literally a woman artist justified trying to, in some way, put up trigger warnings against his prints by saying he would have sat on chairs and worked at tables whose timber had come from the British colonies, and therefore some action needs to be taken against him retrospectively several hundred years later. This is puritanical insanity. I'll shut up now.
No, I think what's particularly interesting about this story is that the president of the union obviously felt under immense pressure to cancel this man.
What a weasel.
Because of various student groups got involved and said it was very offensive. He had to then apologise. But then there's been a counter backlash, and now he said that he won't draw up this blacklist. So it very much goes with the wind. And you can see that there's that fear of cancel culture that's within within every university and other organisations. So what do you think? Do you think that, Kristian, do you think that, what exactly can we do to counter this as an ideology? Because I don't think you can go into a university and say to students that you have no right to ban any speaker.
No, absolutely not. And that's the reason why, as liberals, we have long had a problem responding effectively to cancel culture. Because for decades, the whole time, liberals have defended the rights of private organizations to have restrictive rules internally. I remember a piece on our blog from ages ago, which was when Harriet Harman was still a minister, and she talked about banning gentlemen clubs where all the members had to be men, and where was a private club saying we only accept men as members, and we said, well, this is a private club. They have the right to have these rules for themselves. You don't have to like it. If you don't like it, just stay away from them. It's all voluntary, and we've always made that sort of argument that as long as it's a private organization, as long as you are the proprietor or the members, you can have whatever rules you like. We don't have to approve of it. It doesn't matter what we think of it. And if you're starting from that position, it's quite hard to criticize cancel culture, because it is not per se incompatible with that. We could say, okay, a student union, a university, a company, those organizations, they're clearly private organizations. They should have a right to have whatever rules they like. We may hate it, but it's not our organization. It's not our students' association. It doesn't matter what we think. But what I would say is that even though as liberals we should defend the right of student unions, universities, companies, clubs, sport leagues to be restrictive, and that can mean restrictive in a woke way, we can still have opinions on it. We can defend someone's right to do something while still condemning the action, and we can still say we strongly disapprove of what you're doing here. And the whole reason why cancel culture, woke culture has spread thus far, and why it's become so powerful, is that the people on the pro woke side, the people enforcing these orthodoxies, are so animated. That's why they capture institutions, and the people who are not on board with this, so far at least, tended to be very passive. They may have grumbled about it, they may have been, you always get these surveys where it turns out a lot of people aren't that happy about it, but won't do much about it. And in this case, this was one of the first instances where there has been an actual backlash in the sense of, of actual counter pressure. And it's been effective, and I'm saying I think that's brilliant. We should see a lot more of that.
Yes, perhaps we're at a turning point. Of course, Monty Python star John Cleese stepped in with a sort of, a preemptive boycott of the debating society, and it worked. That was probably one of the factors which changed the union president's mind on this blacklist and banning this speaker for perpetuity. Do you think that we'll see this more? Because it seems that it has to be celebrities who face the Twitter mob, who speak out on these things, who already have platforms. They're uncancelable. It's harder for, let's say, just, the average Joe to stand up to his employer or at a university and say, I don't believe in whatever they're being told to believe in. Do you think we'll see more of this?
We are seeing more of it. You're absolutely right that it's easier for J.K. Rowling or John Cleese or Anton de Berniers to make a stand. A lot of people say, particularly working in the corporate sector, for say Goldman Sachs or something, they would be immediately sacked if they went public with their liberal views. But what we are seeing is a lot of people from outside of that world of corporate culture are beginning to take action in different ways. They're taking action as consumers. So when Gillette ran a whole series of very sexist adverts against men, nobody organised the campaign, but Gillette apparently were flooded.
Do you remember the content of those adverts? I can't remember.
It was all about toxic masculinity,
yes.
and
Yes.
yeah, please buy our razors, but don't use sexist language or something. So lots of men made it quite clear to the company they would no longer be buying their products. Apparently there was a big fall off in sales, so that was a good thing. We're seeing people organising, for example, within the National Trust, putting up candidates, some of whom were successful in the recent elections. In a more informal way still, we've seen what's been happening in the red wall seats, where traditional Labour and non-aligned voters have been making their preferences clear about the culture war by withholding their support from the political party they would have once traditionally supported, but which is now completely, in line with this whole puritanical, authoritarian ideology.
But Kristian, you've said something that contradicts that, I think. You've said that it's a win-win for corporates and businesses and brands to be woke on social media, that most people will just shrug their shoulders, but they'll win points with the woke millennial Gen Z crowd. Do you think that always stands, or do you think when it goes too far, like in the case of Gillette, it is actually a self-inflicted wound?
I haven't followed that particular case. If it worked in this case, that maybe so. I didn't say this. This is an iron law of life that it always pays to be woke. It's just that when the first corporate wokery campaigns came up, I saw some people on the conservative and the liberal side saying, that's not going to work. Go woke, go broke, there will be a consumer backlash. And then in a lot of cases that was announced, but the consumer backlash never came. And
Yes.
that's why I said, go woke, go broke is a coping strategy. It's this is some people on the pro-free speech, liberal, conservative side, who convince themselves that there's lots of people out there who are like them, a silent majority. And I said, no, you're kidding yourself. This isn't true. Most people are maybe vaguely on your side in the sense of not being super woke, but they are not nearly as animated about it. The anti-woke side is just as much of a bubble and echo chamber as the woke side. And the reason why companies did that so far, try to give themselves a woke image, is simply that it appeals to some woke people, maybe not very much, because many of them would also be anti-corporate in general and would think, well, they would see through it, they would see this is just an advertisement campaign, we don't believe you. But you might appeal to some people. Whereas you're not putting off anyone if the non-woke are just indifferent.
Yes.
Then it's costless.
Yes, I can't see, I don't know, Joe and Steve from Woking choosing not to fly with BA because of the banning of ladies and gentlemen, or not shopping at M&S because of the pronoun badges.
And I have some sympathy with Joe and whoever the other guy is, Joe and Steve. I think there's something to be said for that. And that's why I'm a bit ambivalent about consumer boycotts. I don't think we should replicate what the progressive left is doing. As a liberal, I quite
like... Not even for Ben and Jerry's.
Not even them, no. I think there's a lot to be said for... I mean, we've always made the point that in a market economy, you could trade with people whose values you reject. We don't have to agree. We can still trade something, we can still exchange goods and services. And I quite like that idea. I wouldn't want to have to look up the political persuasions of the shareholders of every company that I might buy something from. So far, I quite like the idea that I can be indifferent about that.
Fair enough. Now, Marc, you wrote an interesting short letter to the Times the other day, or was it a few weeks ago? The Telegraph.
Please get it right.
Oh, I thought it was the Times. I was so
the
shocked.
Times are so common.
Okay, it was to the Telegraph, and you argued that the postmodernist New Left is ultimately incompatible with diversity of opinion and thus liberal democracy. Do you mind just quickly breaking down what you mean by the postmodernist New Left, and why it's not compatible with a liberal democracy?
At the heart of New Left ideology, and you have to go back to the Frankfurt School and then the French and American postmodernists, among others, is the central and incredibly sinister idea that language is potentially a form of coercive power. Mm-hmm. So they've abandoned the traditional socialist, Marxist-influenced idea that power is concentrated, is focused on the economy, and the relationship between the capitalist class and the working class. They've replaced that with the idea that there are a whole series of oppressor groups in society, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever, but they assert that men, for example, are a patriarchy who oppress women, and so on and so forth. And these alleged systems, structures of oppression, which clearly do not empirically exist, because Britain is not apartheid South Africa, which actually had laws in place just to entrench discrimination against various groups. So Britain is clearly not that. And yet they are asserting that Britain is effectively, qualitatively no different. And that the way this power is exerted is not through law and physical coercion. It's achieved through the use of language. And therefore they give themselves license to censor, to prohibit potentially any narrative they argue is connected to oppressive identity politics. Mm-hmm. And therefore they see censorship not as a negative thing, but as actually something that is potentially liberatory. Mm-hmm. So the logic of this is the more you censor, the more you eradicate the narratives of sexism, white supremacy, economic liberalism, or whatever it happens to be, the more free you're making that society. Yeah. I mean, there's a Labour MP who's actually said debate is code for imposing oppression, and there shouldn't be any debate. I mean, you know, Diane Abbott and Dawn Butler celebrated overtly Extinction Rebellion stopping the printing and distribution of various newspapers. So we're moving towards a situation where I think the new left, not the old traditional left, they're completely different, and they have a lot of very honourable people who are politically, if not economically, liberal. But the new left is, I think, a proto-authoritarian and highly sinister movement. And I think we're just at the beginning of this journey. I mean, people start talking about, there's going to be, you know, this is going to sort of play itself out, and they're all going to eat each other in the same way that, you know, the transgenderists are trying to stop the TERFs, the traditional feminists, from speaking. No. There are divisions within this coalition, because it's a very broad coalition, but fundamentally they all share the logic that to censor, to prohibit, to narrow the range of what we are allowed to discuss in this society is a good thing.
But I mean, this has very much trickled down to people of my age, in their 20s and younger, where they overtly say that either cancel culture doesn't exist, or that if it does, it is virtuous because, as you say, it's stopping bad thoughts and bad speech and discrimination against various groups. I remember a topic of discussion that was by a young woman who I follow on Instagram. She was talking to all her thousands and thousands of followers about what you do at Christmas when you have your bigoted grandparents over and you have to discuss things like, I don't know, Brexit or immigration, or they might say something problematic. What do you do in these circumstances? And they had to decide between whether you just try and re-educate them, or if it's gone too far and you can't re-educate them, you simply have to distance yourself, i.e. don't talk to them at all. So essentially cancel your own family. That's how strong this ideology is. And as you say,
there are a lot of parallels, interesting parallels in history
yes.
of people shopping their relatives to the authorities. I mean, probably that happened in East Germany a lot, or North Korea. Well, I suppose in North Korea they don't have any debate about anything, but you know what I mean. So that's in itself very revealing.
Sorry about that. That was a phone call that came through on my computer.
You're just too popular.
Just too popular. It's a work call. So I was going to bring you in on that, but I can't remember exactly what I was going to ask you, Kristian. You see this very much firsthand on social media, the attempts to cancel, and you poke fun, which is quite funny, which often gets your left-wing followers very riled up. But how do you think that this sort of thinking is what is motivating such things as mandatory anti-racism courses? I think it's quite a clever use of language that they call it an anti-racism workshop, because who could possibly be against such a thing? It sounds so nice, but how is it sinister if it is?
Well, it starts from the presumption, first of all, that there is a massive problem here, that Britain is an institutionally racist society, that some people are part of oppressor groups, we certainly are here, and that you are implicated and have to admit your own guilt and all that. These are all assertions. I would just reject all of those. So therefore, this isn't something value neutral that you can just participate in, like a fire drill procedure where you just tell people about certain things and then it's up to you what you want to make with that information. And it's also, yes, student unions can offer that sort of stuff if they want to. They can offer all sorts of mumbo jumbo as far as I'm concerned. But these are all things where for some courses you can't even matriculate if you refuse to take part in this, and there would also be some quite intense social pressure, I would imagine, to take part in that. And that's where, again, it doesn't have to be illegitimate, but we can still be judgmental about it. And I think the way to deal with this is clearly to ridicule it, because that's something that I wouldn't generally say. Generally, when you disagree with people, it makes sense to assume that they are well-meaning and to show that you take them seriously. On most of the economic issues that we normally talk about, that would be the way to go, rather than ridicule, engage in a sensible way. But in the case of this aggressive wokery, I just do not accept that these people are well intentioned. I just don't. I think this is clearly a form of social domineering. This is driven by activists who use this as a way to signal their own imagined moral superiority. And a lot of woke activists just really enjoy calling people racists. You see this all the time, that the moment if you criticize Diane Abbott in some way on Twitter, within 5 seconds you will have people in your notifications saying that this is motivated by racism. No matter how clear it is that you're criticizing a political position, that you would say the exact same thing if a white person expressed that position, that will just nonetheless happen. And that's because these are people who just enjoy doing that.
Yes,
and we have to call them out.
We've certainly got to a stage where sex and gender are used as weapons, which is not a very nice place to be. But, Marc, just to finish, critics obviously argue that mandatory diversity courses are a threat to free speech, like yourself. But don't these courses, in a way, or some might argue that don't these courses, in a way, promote free speech? They give speech to previously marginalised groups. What are your thoughts on that?
Patronising is
but that is an argument that you hear.
Implicitly racist.
That is an argument that you hear
sexist.
time and time again to justify these kind of courses, to justify critical race theory, which of course, is the basis upon why we have these kind of courses. They're all got critical race theory running through them. Is there no truth to that at all?
No, absolutely not. This is the great, intellectual hoax that the New Left have been imposing, that there are identity groups. First of all, they have conceptualized these groups. They don't exist in objective reality simply because somebody has a particular, skin tone or ethnicity of some type or sex, doesn't actually mean they're part of some group which can be labelled oppressor or oppressed. Again, we only have to go back into history to see where this kind of atavistic tribalism can end up. And all totalitarian ideologies, regardless of what they call themselves and how they present themselves to the world, theoretically, that in essence is what all of them share, and that is why they are all totally illiberal. Critical race theory, for example, is by definition a racist ideology. It's racist in two different ways. First of all, it says that all white people, just by virtue of the skin tone, are an oppressor group. UCL University, which is imposing one of these obscene courses, mandatory courses, brainwashing courses on its students, overtly says that white students must be made to come to terms with their guilt. This is very, very dangerous and sinister stuff, but it's also racist because, of course, it implies that individuals who just so happen to have a particular type of ethnicity or religious background or whatever it is, are in some way less able to speak. There are no laws, as far as I'm aware, in this country or most Western societies which actually prohibit people from speaking on the basis of their ethnic background. This is really patronising stuff towards British people who just so happen to have ethnic and sexual backgrounds which are different from the norm. So critical race theory, together with all of these other authoritarian doctrines, are in a way the opposite of what they present themselves to be. It's what Ayn Rand called an anti-concept. It's the reverse of what you think it is. It's a bit like the doctrine of positive discrimination is actually not positive discrimination, it's just discrimination which is dressed up in a different kind of a way.
So, thank you very much. So I think we've decided that firstly cancel culture does exist and that there may well be a classical liberal answer to it, or at least a way of looking at it, and that perhaps we all need to be a little bit more judgmental.
Absolutely.
When it comes to the Twitter mob, when it comes to cancel culture, when it comes to no platforming, when it comes to corporate wokery that we see every day. So thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe to the IEA channel and give this video a like, and we'll be back for more soon.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.